Your Superior Self, episode 46.
I decided that July 11th, 2001 would be my last bad day because I knew, like, if I had my wife and my daughters in my life and I hit the pillow every night with them in my life, then it would be impossible to label my day as a bad day. And anyone has to do, all they have to do is check out your website and they know how much you love your family. So I would say that, that practice of gratitude, to catalog that before you go to bed each night. And I can guarantee, like, you go through all the different things in your life that happen today or tomorrow, and even some of the challenges that when you think about it, it's going to be impossible to label that day as a bad day.
What is going on, Superior Nation? I am Trey Downs, and this is your Superior Self podcast. I am a blue-collar worker turned into blue-collar entrepreneur, and each week I will interview inspiring influencers who will help you become your superior self. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get after it. During the month of January, I will be reading excerpts from the book The 48 Laws of Power, written by Robert Greene. It is a national bestseller. It also has been banned from numerous prison institutions due to the influence of these laws. The law that I'll be reading today is law number 44, which is titled Disarm and Infuriate with the Mirror Effect. And I've never heard of this before, this tactic, until I read this book, and it's very interesting. It goes on to say the mirror reflects reality, but it is also the perfect tool for deception. When you mirror your enemies doing exactly as they do, they cannot figure out your strategy. The mirror effect mocks and humiliates them, making them overreact. By holding up a mirror to their psyches, you seduce them with the illusion that you share their values. By holding up a mirror to their actions, you teach them a lesson. Few can resist the power of the mirror effect. And there are actually 4 other effects that go along with it underneath its own umbrella, but the one that I want to read is the narcissist effect. And it goes on to say, gazing at the image in the waters of a pond, the Greek young Narcissus fell in love with it. And when he found out that the image was his own reflection and that he therefore could not consummate his love, he despaired and drowned himself. All of us have a similar problem. We are profoundly in love with ourselves. But since this love excludes a love object outside of ourselves, it remains continuously unsatisfied and unfulfilled. The narcissist effect plays on this universal narcissism. You look deep into the souls of other people, fathom their inmost desires, their values, their tastes, their spirit, and you reflect it back to them, making yourself into a kind of mirror image. Your ability to reflect their psyche gives you great power over them. They may even feel a tinge of love. This is simply the ability to mimic another person, not physically, but psychologically. And it is immensely powerful because it plays upon the unsatisfied self-love of a child. Normally, people bombard us with their experiences, their tastes. They hardly ever make the effort to see things through our eyes. This is annoying, but it also creates great opportunity. If you can show you understand another person by reflecting their inmost feelings, they will be entranced and disarmed. All the more so because it happens so rarely. No one can resist this feeling of being harmoniously reflected in the outside world, even though you might well be manufacturing it from their benefit and for deception purposes of your own. And I apologize for how long that reading was, but I think it's so important to really understand how that law works. So I know there are plenty of you guys out there and girls who do not like social settings. Like, you go out to a party and you just don't like the feeling you get when you just don't know anyone in the room, or you might know one or two and they leave and they go do something and you're there hanging out with people you don't know, or you're in the office and you're trying to make an impression on your boss and you don't know how. You're just in this awkward, you might be in the same area. Like, let's say the lunchroom, and your boss is there, and you guys might not have a great relationship, and you're trying to make an impression on him. And well, here's what you do. All right. So I've done this a couple times. It's actually kind of similar to what Dale Carnegie says in How to Win Friends and Influence People, is by basically just talking about the other person. And how you do that is kind of find what they're interested in and just keep asking questions about that. I promise you that is how you're going to make an impression, because you will literally say maybe 2 or 3 words in that entire conversation, because we love talking about ourselves. We love it. I know I do. When I go out somewhere in public and someone asks me about the podcast or life or family, like we're going out into the outside world and someone's actually caring about what I'm doing. So of course I just literally just dump everything that I'm doing on them, and it feels great. And I think they're the best person in the world for just asking me about something that I'm doing on the side. So think about that. Like when you're out in a social situation and you don't want to talk to somebody because you're uncomfortable, go up there and just say hi and just start asking their name and find out what they like to do and just hammer on that. Just whatever it may be, just start asking questions about that and dig. And I guarantee it, you will make an impression on that person, even with your boss. And this has happened to me before in the past, where I've had bosses where I didn't have a close relationship with them, but as soon as I started talking about something they were interested in, they would not be quiet. Like it was insane. Like we literally maybe have had 2 or 3 conversations beforehand, maybe 3 minutes a piece. And I know that's kind of hard to fathom, but there are, I'm guaranteed there are other relationships out there with their superiors where their relationship is not as close. But if you want to get in there and start talking to them, find out something about them that they are interested in. It could be their family. And that's what happened with me. I just started talking about family, and it was like the floodgates opened, and we're sitting there for a half hour talking when before it was only like 5 minutes. So try and practice this wherever you're out, whatever environment you're in, and you're uncomfortable and it's social and whatever. Like find someone that you want to speak to and just find out what they're interested in and just start hammering on that. Like doesn't matter. Whatever they're into, you start asking about that. I guarantee you they will think you're the best conversationist ever. And before I dive in to the interview with today's guest, Michael O'Brien, I wanted to take a moment and show some gratitude, some love to you guys, the listeners, for downloading the episodes and hanging out with me on a weekly basis. Thank you guys so much. It means so much to me that you guys are giving me such positive feedback. Keep it up. Please keep leaving ratings and reviews wherever you get your podcast from. It helps me out. It helps me get the message out. It helps me help others. And I also wanted to show some love to my West Coast friends, because I was looking at the download numbers the other day, which aren't a big thing for me, but it was surprising to see that San Francisco, you guys are crushing the downloads. You guys are leading the entire country. And since you guys are crushing the downloads, I wanted to give you guys a shout out and say thank you. Thank you for supporting the show since day one. It has been a wild ride for me, to say the least, but your support definitely fires me up. I am also fired up about today's guest. His name is Michael O'Brien. He is a sales and marketing executive business coach who helps leaders slay. And I love that word. I'm going to start using it more often. He helps them slay their internal feelings of worry and doubt so that they can achieve complete success for themselves and their teams. Before starting his executive coaching firm, Peloton Coaching and Consulting, Michael spent over 2 decades in the pharmaceutical and bio industry in roles that ranged from sales to marketing to executive leadership. Before launching his coaching career, Michael experienced a life-altering event that ruptured his worldview. On July 11, 2001, he was struck head-on by a speeding SUV while out on a training bike ride. Now Michael considers it his last bad day and shares his journey from being a human doer to a human being in his best-selling memoir, Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows, and he donates all the proceeds to the World Bicycle Relief. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Michael O'Brien. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Your Superior Self. Tonight, I am excited to have on the show Michael O'Brien. Before launching into his coaching career, Michael experienced a life-altering event that ruptured his worldview. On July 11th, 2001, he was struck head-on by a speeding SUV while out on a training bike ride. Now, Michael considers it his last bad day and shares his journey from being a human doer to a human being in his best-selling memoir, Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows, and donates all the proceeds to the World Bicycle Relief. Michael, welcome to the show, brother.
Trey, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this, and to all your listeners out there, a big hello from New Jersey. I'm pretty pumped for our conversation tonight.
Awesome. I'm excited. So why don't you go ahead and start off with the intro with the life-altering event. Can you go ahead and explain that to my listeners?
Absolutely. Well, that was obviously the understatement of the evening was a huge day, life-changing day. So I was out in New Mexico, north of Albuquerque, south of Santa Fe, for a company meeting. Probably many of your listeners have been to company meetings where you fly out on Monday, fly back on Friday, and it's like death by PowerPoint in between. Well, I decided to bring my bike out. I've been an avid cyclist going back to when I was in high school. I thought I'd get a couple morning miles in, avoid the hotel gym, cross New Mexico off the states I've ridden my bike, and just breathe in the fresh air as opposed to the stuffy hotel conference room. And I had this great loop planned out. I would go out the back of the hotel, up the main entrance. It's about a 2-mile loop. I figured I'd get like 10 laps in. But unfortunately, on the fourth lap, I came around the bend, and a white SUV, as you mentioned in the intro, was right in my lane, was heading right towards me, going about 40 miles an hour. That's what the police estimated he was going based on the impact and the skid marks and the whole thing. And it was so surreal, Trey. I was like, I couldn't compute it fast enough. And I was like, certainly it's going to move. It's going to move. It's going to move. It's going to move. Oh, my God, it's not going to move. Holy cow, it's not going to move. And then before you know it, everything slowed down like right before impact. And I remember the sound of me hitting his grill and then flipping into his windshield and breaking through the windshield. And then I remember the screech of his brakes. And then even the thud I made as I fell off the hood onto the asphalt below. And of course, as one would imagine, I got knocked unconscious. But I regained my consciousness when the EMTs arrived. I was surrounded by EMTs and medical support. And I asked the question only another cyclist can really appreciate. I asked them, hey, how's my bike? As a way to sort of cut the tension. And because I like to use humor to cut tension when it gets a little uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable on so many levels. Just the thought of moving was painful. And I knew I was in a world of hurt, and the situation was pretty grim. And they just looked at me and they're like, your bike's fine. So, and then they went on to try to save my life. And what happened was what I didn't know it at the time. The doctors eventually told my wife, had I been 10 years older or not in shape at the time, I would have died before I got to the hospital. My first surgery required 34 units of blood. And what happened is I broke, of course, a whole bunch of everything. But the main injury was I shattered the left femur, the left leg took the brunt of the accident or the impact. And when that femur shattered, a piece of bone lacerated the femoral artery. So in essence, I was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. And the doctors are like, we really don't know how you survived, but you did. And so I knew that there was maybe a greater purpose to my survival.
And for my listeners that don't know, the femur is the biggest bone in your body. And to shatter that, that's pretty intense. I can only imagine the other injuries that you sustained, but coming back from that is just mind-blowing. And then the bleeding out, that's phenomenal. Like like you said, there is a reason. There has to be a reason. Like somebody surviving that, there has to be a reason why you're here. And do you ever feel like pressure to fulfill that meaning, to kind of find your purpose because you were saved that day?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trey. I think I don't necessarily feel pressure, but I do feel a sense of responsibility, because I'm only here today. When people pick up my book and they'll see me riding my bike on the cover, and it's like technically my memoir, so everyone's like, "Oh, it's a story about you," and really, it's more of a story about everyone else. Yeah, certainly I'm part of it, but I'm only here because of those people around me. And what people will read when they read the story is that my wife kicks ass. Like people tell me all the time, like, your wife's a rock star. She's like the hero of the book. I'm like, hell yeah, she is. So I feel a big responsibility for my medical team, to my physical therapist, to my wife, to my daughters, to my friends and family who put so much energy into helping me get back to where I am today, that I do feel like a great sense of responsibility to honor their energy that they put forth during not only that day, but really the 17 years since that day. So I want to give back to them. I'm I have so much love and compassion for them, because they put me in a position to go forward and change some lives with my story.
Love that. How long were you out of commission?
Oh, wow. Well, I was in the hospital for about 3.5 months, but one could argue that I probably was in a condition where I should have stayed longer, but given the American healthcare system, they wanted to get me out of the hospital because it's cheaper that way.
Yeah. Well, they need more money and more beds, right?
Yeah, so they're like, "Hey, release the bad, get him home. He's good enough to go home." But was going home was really cool. I wanted to get home. I sort of I wanted to be cozy, if you will, comfortable. But it was really hard to navigate home. Like, I couldn't walk up and down the stairs. Going in the shower, like preparing for the shower, took 20 minutes. And I'm not a big shower taker, so my showers lasted like 3 minutes. So it was an ordeal just to do some of the basic stuff. So yeah, about 3.5 months in the hospital, but years of outpatient therapy. And when I left that hospital, I still had about 9 surgeries in front of me. And a couple of them were doozies. Like one surgery in particular, the surgery that I really needed to get my left leg to bend enough so I could even have the possibility to function better, to get back on the bike. The surgeon said, "Listen, this is really risky. If I go in there, you have so much bone and so much scar tissue. If I nick your bypass graft," because they had to do a bypass graft around the femoral artery, "if I nick that or damage that somehow, just by accident, like, I'm going to have to make a call on the table. I'm not going to wake you up. I'm not going to bring you out of anesthesia. So we're going to probably have to amputate your leg above your knee. Are you cool with that?" And, that sounds pretty casual. Hey, you cool with that? But it took 3 months of back and forth to make that decision. And I got to a point where I was at peace because I knew I couldn't function in the way that I wanted to. So for me, it was worth the risk. And he did an unbelievably amazing job and really helped me gain some functionality in that left leg, get the flexion I needed. Not only to ride the bike. It wasn't just about getting back on the bike, but just to be able to function well, to walk up and down the stairs. So I had one heck of a medical team behind me, and I feel really lucky that I did.
So he was able to save the leg?
Yeah. So my initial surgeon, the trauma surgeon, did a remarkable job that day on July 11th, 2001. Most orthopedic surgeons I've spoken with just in my travels said that if you came to us with your injury, with a femoral artery laceration or tear, if you will, we probably would have amputated your leg above the knee to save your life. But my trauma surgeon was able to not only fix the leg, put it back together, because keep in mind, when the femur shattered, it was a whole bunch of puzzle pieces. So he had to get the leg length right, and what last swelling, blood loss, the whole thing. It was a mess. It was a horrific scene, not just sort of, it was. So the subsequent surgery was really around So here I am, I'm in the hospital bed, not really moving. So now all the scar tissue is being laid down as the body's trying to heal. And the body went so crazy with like trying to, the body was telling the femur to heal. And so it laid down a whole bunch of excess bone. Like, so when someone looks at my left knee, it's pretty big because there was so much extra bone because the body went crazy with like, because the trauma was so significant. So you had to really break through a lot of bone that was getting in the way of the leg functioning well and a whole bunch of scar tissue to get the leg to just move. So it was a pretty massive surgery. And along the way, this is the one thing I do feel lucky about, because not everyone gets this, here in the United States, is I had really good medical care. And to put me in a position where if I put in the work, I could regain my functionality. I could get back on the bike and I could become the person I wanted to become, once we got through that initial phase of the accident.
So was it after this accident that you kind of realized that you were here for something and that changed your outlook on life? Or was it something that you considered doing before the accident?
Yeah, great question, Trey. So the accident really did shake me up. I remember at the scene of the accident, because I remember everything about that day. And what I remember, two things really vividly, is one, willing myself not to fall asleep. I would say, Michael, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep, don't fall asleep. And I would doze off. I'd be woozy. I was losing blood. I would like sort of feel like I was drifting in and out of consciousness. And I thought if I could stay awake, as wacky as this sounds, it sounds bananas, I know, that I could control the situation. And that's nuts because I had no control over the situation. The other thing I remember, as they moved me onto the medevac, to the helicopter to take me to the trauma center, I told myself if I lived, life would be different. I'd stop chasing happiness. Because sort of like, your story and the stories that you profile, before my accident, I was chasing happiness. That sentence, like, I'll be happy when, I would repeat that over and over again. I would be like, well, I'll be happy when I get promoted. I'll be happy when I buy that new car. I'll be happy when this meeting is over. I was just chasing it and sort of spinning my wheels. And since I thought I had to play Superman at work because I was the leader of my team, and I had to play Superman at home because I was the dad and the husband and the primary breadwinner, what I was doing is I thought I was playing this role that wasn't possible to play. And what I was doing was pouring a whole bunch of stress inside of me, because I would like show up and be like, yeah, I'm all good. I'm fine. I got this. I'm cool. Right. But I was hiding the truth from a lot of people, including myself. I would just pour the stress inside, trying to control it, trying to repress it, trying to restrict it. And when you do that with energy, when you do that with emotion, eventually it's going to pop out. Eventually it goes somewhere. For me, literally and figuratively, that SUV knocked all that bad mojo out of my system and gave me a chance to make a different choice. For other people, it could be like disease, like, you might get cancer or relationships break. But if you try to restrict everything, you try to force things in, like, you try to use that pressure, a lot of times what you get back is more pressure. You get back more control, more restriction. And that's not healthy really for anyone. And I was living my life that way. I had a good life. I had two young daughters. Lynn and I, my wife, were married 7 years. I had a good career, but I was pouring the stress inside. And again, sort of chasing happiness, which unfortunately, there are a whole bunch of people out there that do that even current day. Just being busy without the awareness, without, the thoughtfulness and how do I want to show up in life? And that deal I made with myself, I'm going to have a different life, I'm going to stop chasing happiness, was all about, I want to live life differently.
I love that. I think a lot of people, like you said, chase happiness. We don't really realize that happiness is like 6 seconds. Like we spend so much time in the journey of trying to achieve success or happiness, and it lasts like 6 seconds. I think the most, I don't think I've ever experienced happiness longer than maybe an hour. Like it doesn't last more than a day, I don't think. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's not sustainable. It's an emotion. It's just like sadness. It's just like depression. It's just like anything else. Anger.
Yeah.
It's not something that is long lasting. And people need to realize that if you continue to chase something that doesn't last, you're not going to last. Like, you're just going to burn out and you're going to emotionally be a wreck. So you need to, like, instead of chasing certain things that make you happy, you need to start looking inward and try to find fulfillment in what you're already doing.
Yeah. I love what you just said. I know, you live in a pretty, great area of the country. There's, obviously a lot of people with high profile careers, and so do I up here outside of New York. And a lot of people have a lot of stuff, right? They have the house, they have the cars, they have all, the right clothes, all that jazz, right? But so any given measure, they look like they're wealthy, but inside they're not wealthy. They don't have that joy and the happiness, that inner wealth, as I like to call it. And unfortunately, some people have pain along with that, and they numb their pain through a variety of different means. And you did, to your point, Trey, like, a lot of people get to a certain point in their career and they're just burnt out and things start to crumble. And it doesn't have to be that way. And what I learned through my accident is that it doesn't have to be that way. And there's a different ways to live your life where it can be much more purposeful, and just being able to be present and not chase stuff.
Be where your feet are. Be in that moment.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome.
I know a lot of people tend to, mentally, right? So you just go from one achievement to the next, not really focusing on what you just did. Like, you're writing a book. So let's say you write a book and now it's published. Now you're trying to launch it. Now you're trying to get coverage. Now you're trying to push it out, market it. Like, you're not really, go back to the beginning where you wrote and finished the book. Like, bask in that glory just for 30 minutes or something, and meditate on that you just achieved something in your life. A lot of people just go through life from achievement to achievement to achievement, not really celebrating that. And then even though physically they're moving ahead, mentally they're back at the starting line.
Absolutely. And just they're just not staying present. And so advice to the listeners out there is find that quiet space, the power of the pause, so you can stay present. And it puts you in a position where you can be much more thoughtful and responsive to what's happening in life, as opposed to what's happening with a lot of folks is just this reactive quality. And I think one of the big keys going forward for success in life is our ability to stay disciplined in the moment. Because we have all this information and all these scrolling of social media and all this stuff coming at us at a faster rate. I think those that can be successful going forward will have the skill to be disciplined and stay focused and present on what's right in front of them, as opposed to like the multitasking hero, which we know we really can't do, although sometimes we lie to ourselves, right?
You wear yourself thin. I think it was a book I was reading. I think it's The One Thing or something like that, where it just says you can't really multitask and be 100% at all things. You have to focus on one thing at a time. That way you put your whole being into it, and then you make that product so much better, as opposed to working on 5 different projects. You just can't, you're spreading yourself too thin. You can't put your attention to detail in every little bit of thing. You have to focus on one thing at a time. And that way you're not cheating yourself, and you're not cheating whatever you're working on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you get more done that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this bike accident, that really sparked the energy and life inside of you to really start looking differently on how you achieve things, or how you focus on happiness, or maybe not even focus on happiness, but focusing on your fulfillment. Why do you think other people don't do that? What's holding them back from achieving their own vision?
I think the hard thing for people today is putting forth emotional labor. So we've sort of grown up as people, as maybe as a country, doing physical labor, right? The job at hand, like laying down railroad track, building buildings, building roads, all that stuff. But I think the biggest currency today is really around awareness, the emotional labor, and having the courage, finding that courage to self-reflect. We tend to judge a lot, we tend to vent a lot, and that's easy sort of to do, like point the finger at behavior that we see, how it's not right and it's wrong. But when we do that, we take our attention away from us. And I was guilty of this in the beginning. I would compare myself to others, people maybe in my community, people at the job, what they had and what I didn't have, as opposed to just really looking at myself. Working on ourselves, like self-mastery, is a hard thing to do. It takes a certain level of, as I mentioned, courage and the vulnerability to move forward past the courage, because vulnerability is about going forward and not necessarily knowing what we're going to get next. And part of all that is trying to change the narrative in our head. When I came out of the ICU tray, like the narrative in my head was I was a victim. And the doctors told me about like the extent of my injuries, and they started painting a picture of dependency, more surgeries, limitations. They told me the driver had a revoked license, that the accident probably should not have happened. So in the spirit that we go where our eyes go, I started to go dark and angry and bitter. And that victim loop just was such an easy movie to queue up. It was like, like you can watch Netflix and like you watch one episode and it starts right away after 5 seconds. Like I had that victim story in my loop. And the thing is, everyone around me was validating it because things were grim, but it wasn't helping me. I'd cry myself to sleep most nights thinking like, this is so unfair. Why'd this happen to me? And then I realized I had to change my self-narrative. I had to change my relationship with my inner critic, that resistance, and move from I'm a victim story to one I'm resilient. And I think what gets in the way of a lot of people is just we have this voice in our head that, plants a seed of doubt, maybe some fear, some anxiousness, worry, maybe even shame. Like, hey, who are you to go out and do a podcast or write a blog post or start your own company or go after that promotion? Like, are you really good enough? And that self-doubt gets in the way of so much progress. And so the more we can practice emotional labor, put that forward, then we can change the relationship with it. And it's not about controlling it or restricting it or pushing it away, but it's accepting that when it shows up, it's probably a really good signal that we should move forward. And I think that's a big thing that could really, if more folks got better at that, it could really change their level of success in their life.
So what exactly changed your thought process from victim to empowerment and to turning your thought process around to being a little bit more positive? Like, was there something that happened? Was it a conversation? What was it that changed your viewpoint?
Well, as I share in the book, there are a lot of like micro events that, looking back, I can see them now. At the time, I couldn't see them because I really wasn't all that mindful. There was definitely one big moment when I was in a physical rehab session. I looked around the room and I was like, why are some people getting better and why aren't others, including myself? I wasn't getting better at the rate that I wanted. And I realized that the people that were getting better just had a more abundant mindset. They saw things differently. Instead of focusing in on what they didn't have and couldn't do, they were focusing in on what they still had, what they still could do. And so I actually used the energy of anger. Like a lot of times we talk about anger and we're like, oh, anger is bad, right? But it's a fair emotion. It's a human emotion, just like sadness and happiness and joy. And anger in itself isn't bad. That's just a label we put on it. If there's a lot of great energy from that. And I made a determination I was going to use the energy of anger to because I was fed up with like my lack of progress. I was like, all right, I'm dissatisfied. I'm going to I need to change how I show up. And so I had that moment where I was just scanning the room. And from that energy of that, I decided to change my rituals. I decided to shift my perspective and learn how to do that and try to find the value in the power of the pause. So in a lot of ways, like the energy of anger really worked. Now, what happens a lot with a lot of people is that they don't do anything with the energy of anger. And over time, they just become anger. They just become angry, right? And they don't do anything with it. So if we use the emotion or the energy of our emotions, we can actually move forward. We can keep pedaling, if you will, the a little cycling analogy. So, but for me, it was that big moment in a rehab session to say, okay, if I'm going to be sort of to your philosophy, Trey, is like, if I'm going to become the best I can be, I didn't use my superior self, but I was like the best version of who I could be as a father, a husband, a leader, a person, then I had to show up differently going forward because I knew my mindset was going to drive everything.
What are some of the techniques that you use? Like what you talk about the pause, right? So explain that, and how does that give you an advantage over not just being angry?
Yeah, so the pause is is so valuable, and a lot of times we forget it. So what I did was I really sort of connected with my breath. So I have something that I developed through my recovery called grabbing a PBR, which many people would like think first right off the rip. They'll be, oh, Pabst Blue Ribbon.
That's what I thought.
You're like, you just said you shouldn't numb your pain. And I'm like, no, I'm not a fan of Pabst Blue Ribbon, not endorsed by them. I think life is too short to drink bad beer. So regardless of what the hipsters in Brooklyn say, so grabbing a PBR in my frame was a whole practice of pausing, hitting the pause button, breathing, reconnecting with your breath, and then reflecting. So PBR. And this can be done very simply just in a rhythmic breath of inhale, count of 4, hold for 2, exhale for 4, count, hold for 2. And you do that for a minute or two. And so I began the very next morning after my big aha with just sitting. I woke up early. I climbed out of my bed into my wheelchair and I wheeled myself to a quiet spot in the hospital. And I just centered myself and I set my intentions and I grabbed a PBR or two and just so I could slow things down. So the breath is wonderful, just slowing everything down so we can be more reflective and almost in the spirit that we're not responsible for our first thought, but we are responsible for our second thought and our first action. So we could be responsive to what happens in life. We could set priorities and boundaries and not be in this reactive mode where we're hooked up to our phone or we're rushing from meeting to meeting because we never make our best decisions in life in a reactive frame of mind. We just like the whole fight, flight, like that's all about survival, but like being intentional about how we want to show up for those around us, how we want to put purpose into our work life, our personal lives. We need to be thinking about that. So one of the big things I implemented into my recovery, and I still do it to this day as an entrepreneur, is that power of the pause and grabbing a PBR or two. It was really my first experience with mindfulness and probably the entry point to a meditation practice.
I love meditation. It really allows me to, like you talked about, recenter myself and kind of just tune out all the noise that's around me and really focus on the inside and the energy that I'm feeling at the current moment, whether it be positive or negative, and just kind of clear myself, clear my soul, clear my energy, get back, reset, and just get up and get after it. And really, it's so, I don't know what the word is. It's just so clearing. It's so, it just, I feel like a new man. Like I just feel like that everything that was bothering me is simply doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter anymore. And like you talked about, my next action is huge. It's important because that's going to set the tone for my momentum. How am I going to restart my momentum in the direction that I want to go in? And man, it's crazy. I really like that whole that PBR philosophy, because I really connect with that. And what I want to ask you now is kind of a deep question. Now, looking back on your accident and looking back on what you've achieved so far, do you think, like, that thought of I was here for something bigger, do you feel like you achieved that, or do you think you're on your way to doing that?
I think I'm still on my way. I'm still pedaling. I'm still on that bike ride. And I love the deepness of the question. So I don't think my story is still being written, and I came out of the accident and people are like, things happen for a reason. Like, this was meant to be. And a lot of people early on, Trey, were like, oh, you're so lucky. And at first, because I was in the early days, I was not happy. I was bitter. I was like, yeah, I wasn't lucky. Like, you call this luck? Like, look at me. Or they would say God was looking out for you. And I was like, I don't think God was looking out for me. I think he was having a scone and a latte like 5 seconds before I got hit. Like that's, and so again, this was during my bitter, frustrated, angry phase of it. But coming out of it, I do believe things happen for a reason. And the way I look at it is that there can be several reasons. But right now, where I am in my life chapter is that my reason is to share my story so other people can hear it and maybe avoid their version of an SUV. To take some of the things I've learned along the way. Some things worked, some things didn't. Help executive leaders show up differently at work so they can change work for people. Because when we go into our jobs, our corporate jobs, and that's usually where I do most of my coaching, like, we spend a ton of time doing our job. And we have such a huge responsibility as leaders to show up in the right way to create a positive environment. If we can, I do believe we can change society through the way we lead at work. And so right now, the purpose, I think, of why I lived is to do this. And that purpose could change 10 years from now. It could be something completely different. And going back to like how I was on the day of the accident, like, stay awake, try to control it. Now I've given up trying to control it. I just want to be present and do the work that feels right for me and connect with people that feel right to me, like you, because our stories are similar and our energies and philosophies are really aligned, and we'll see where this takes us, as opposed to this white knuckle grip of life that so many people are on, trying to control the outcome. I'd rather just sort of breathe into it and obviously show up and do the right work and have a vision for going forward. Certainly I have goals, but for right now, I think the purpose is to share my story so other people can learn from it and make some changes in their life if they need to make those changes.
So what do you think, like, with corporate life? Everybody says corporate life, they think negativity right off the bat. And
yeah, they certainly do.
why do you think that why do you think corporate life is like that? Like, you talk about, white knuckle trying to take control of things. Do you think that's why? Because so many executives try to control each situation, or their management style is so micromanaging that they create this culture of just like a political cesspool? Like, why do you think the corporate world is the way that it is?
Oh, wow. God, we could how many hours is your podcast, man? So this would be, yeah, like, we could go all night, like, strap in, like, so I think there's, to unpack it a little bit, I think there's a couple of different things as we approach corporate life. We can work on our self-mastery, like as I mentioned before, or craft mastery. And we put a disproportionate amount of energy into craft mastery, like how to do the job, like, do an Excel or write code or do that type of stuff. But we don't necessarily work on ourselves, especially as leaders, and we come into our job, we do the job really well as an individual contributor, and then someone makes us a leader, but we're not putting enough work and focus into helping build better leaders, leaders that can lead in current times. Like, we had a model in the US where it was very much a hierarchy, right? We left the farms and we went into manufacturing, and the job was to make cars or widgets, and it was to stay in line. And the management was very much a power over as opposed to a power with. And that was the frame of what a leader was, like command and control. I have the power, I have the status. And now the world's changed, and we haven't necessarily kept up the pace in terms of evolving our leadership approach. And going back to the emotional labor, the key, the things that are so important, like the value of conversational intelligence, the value of emotional intelligence, and helping our leaders develop that so they can make connection, and connection not only to each other, but to a greater purpose. And so people can be seen and heard, right? The loneliness that's written about in today's society, that comes into corporate life. So I think there's a lack of great conversations, a lack of emotional intelligence. Certainly there are places out there that live it, but we need to do more work on ourselves. And corporate America doesn't necessarily lend itself well to working on that. So if anyone's been in a corporate workshop, no one's raising their hand amongst all their peers. Picture the room of like 30 people. You're in a traditional corporate workshop, and like raising my hand to say, hey, can I talk about my inner critic, my negative self-narrative? Like, this is what happens when I have doubt. Like, no one says that. No one's going to share that, right?
No, because HR's over there saying, no, you can't say that. No, excuse me, that's not the policy. You can't say that.
Or like, you don't want to be judged, and the bosses are like, pretending that they're all that in a bag of chips. And we all have those emotions inside. We all have our little self-narrative that doesn't necessarily think we're the best. Like, it's our world, the world's worst boss is the one that's in our head. It's one of the reasons why I joke I have post-traumatic workshop disorder, because I've been through in my corporate career, spanned 22 years, a ton of workshops, but none of the change stuck because we weren't getting to the core issues. And some of the core issues are really identifying who we are as a person, who we are as leaders, and showing up with courage and vulnerability. If we could take steps towards that, I think we can change work. But everyone is so guarded, and we're busy being busy, but we're not being busy being purposeful. And I think we need to make some of those changes to make culture better. And I think corporate jobs can be awesome. And I know probably some of your listeners are probably like, what is he talking about? Like, and I'm not saying it has to be unicorns and rainbows and Skittles, but we can make our work that we do really purposeful and meaningful. And it can be certainly a lot more awesome than it is for many people out there. Because again, if work is more fulfilling, we bring back that energy at home, and our home life is better, and that comes back to work. And that's a pretty cool snowball effect, at least in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that the workshops, all the ones that you went to they weren't focused on the individuals. It's always about how we meet the company's mission statement or the mission or vision or whatever. It's never really individually focused. It's all about the corporate setting. And I don't know. I've been to a couple of them myself, and it seems like they try their best, but at the end of the day, it's all about how you make the company better, and not there necessarily to make individual improvements. I don't think, but do you think that leadership, though? Do you think that leadership is something that you're born with, or is it something that you can build over time?
No, I think you can definitely build it over time. I think we all have moments in our lives, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. A lot of people are like, oh, they have charisma, or leaders are extroverts. I think we all have those moments, like those events, those stories, even when we're younger, that are leadership moments. and they're teaching moments that we can use to help build our leadership profile. And I think we can all grow into being a leader. Now, we may not all want to. So there are certain personalities that would rather just be part of a team than lead the team. And we need both, right? Not everyone can be the leader. And not everyone could just be part of the team. But I do think we all have great examples. I could probably talk to anybody and go through their life and pull out amazing stories that they may have forgotten that really show them and highlight themselves as a leader. So I think over time we can build leaders. There's no doubt about it. I don't believe there's one personality type that says, well, this is the leadership philosophy or their personality. I think every organization is different, and you got to match the right people up with the right jobs within the right organization. So I think quiet people can be great leaders. People are more extroverted can be great leaders. I think it depends a lot on the environment and what the task is at hand.
Michael, I could talk to you all night, brother.
Likewise, man. It's been great. Yeah.
How do people connect with you? How can they reach you?
Well, the best way is through my website, michaelobrienshift.com, all one word. There you can learn more about my coaching and my leadership academy for those in the middle. And of course, Shift is there. You can get an autographed copy of Shift, or you could go to Amazon and pick up a copy. So yeah, people can go to michaelobrienshift.com, or people can just give me a phone call, which my number is there on my website as well.
So, Michael, I don't know if you know or not, but at the end of the show, I kind of have all my guests give me a little pep talk, a little spark for my soul. And so what I want to ask you is, how do I make my last bad day, and how do I change the course of my life?
So one question I have with you for tonight, Trey, is what are you most grateful for today?
Family, for sure.
Family. So the thing is, when you have family, and I know your story, and I see your family, and they're so wonderfully profiled on your website. So you might have some challenging days. You might even have some days where you have emotions of sadness or frustration. But each night when you hit the pillow, you have your family there. And for me, that was the moment where I was I decided that July 11th, 2001 would be my last bad day, because I knew if I had my wife and my daughters in my life and I hit the pillow every night with them in my life, then it would be impossible to label my day as a bad day. And anyone has to do, all they have to do is check out your website, and they know how much you love your family. So I would say that, that practice of gratitude, to catalog that before you go to bed each night. And I can guarantee, you go through all the different things in your life that happened today or tomorrow, and even some of the challenges, that when you think about it, it's going to be impossible to label that day as a bad day.
Powerful. His name is Michael O'Brien. He is slaying self-doubt. He is the author of the best-selling memoir, Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows. Pick up his book. Michael, thank you so much for joining this show.
No problem, Trey. And to the listeners, thanks for connecting. Hopefully you got a pearl or two out of our conversation. But thanks, buddy, for having me on. It's always good to connect with someone who's like-minded and shares a philosophy. So thank you so much.
Wow, that was a intense conversation, because I can relate to Michael O'Brien 100% and what he's doing and what he's trying to do. I haven't been hit by a car, but I can relate to him in the sense that we all need to find meaning and purpose in what we're doing. And I support everything that he's trying to do. Make sure you go pick up his book. It is called Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows, Winning at Work and in Life. All the proceeds will go towards World Bicycle Relief. And now I want to thank you, the listener, you listening to this podcast right now. I want to thank you for giving me the inspiration to put content out every week. I want to thank you for downloading. I ask that you continue to download, and please leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcast from. This has been awesome. You guys can follow me on Instagram at tdowns80. You can follow me on Twitter at downstrey. Hit me up over there. Send me a message. You can check me out online at yoursuperiorself.com. Also hit me up on Facebook. It is Trey Downs, DOWNES. Check me out. Hit me up. Friend request me. I have a little side page, I guess you can call it, for Your Superior Self on Facebook. Like the page, support me over there. I'm trying to show you guys behind the scenes of the podcast, give you a little bit of insights on my life, I guess, the personal side of it. Connect with you guys over there. It's been a long show, so I'm a little kooky and dehydrated. So, all right, guys. Well, have a awesome week, and I will talk to you later.